the baqa that they may have is predicated on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If it wasn't for His existence, nothing else would come into existence. The chain of existence, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is outside of this chain of existence. He brought this chain of existence into existence. That is who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is when we say Huwa al-awwal. Now obviously in philosophical terms, the scholars will term this as qidam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is qadeem, and this is what they intend by it. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala predates everything. That He is the first. And it's taken from this name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He is Huwa al-awwal. Now what does this logically entail? When we say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that He is al-awwal, what does that mean? The first is that it gives us this idea that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-ghina al-mutlaq. That He has absolute self-sufficiency. He has absolute self-sufficiency. He does not need anything to bring Him into existence, and He does not depend on any substrate, any action, okay, to come into existence or to maintain His existence. That's the first logical understanding that we can take from this name and attribute, Huwa al-awwal. The second is the wahdaniyah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the uniqueness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When He is the first, then rationally this means that He is unique, because you can't have two firsts. Straight away He is unique, because nothing existed prior to Him. His existence was always there. He is the first. So rationally we can deduce from this that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is unique. And there's also an implied perfection here as well. The fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists and He is the first, and to be the first to exist, you need a number of attributes, and all of those have to be perfect. For example, you have to be omnipotent, omniscient. All of these have to be there for you to be the first. And therefore, this element of tanzih is rationally, we can argue for it as well. Right from the beginning, when sabbaha lillah, this is arguing from a rational basis as well. But why is it that we do the tanzih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because we can rationally prove it as well. So, Huwa al-awwal. The second is al-akhir. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is the last. But again, this is relational. This is relative. That if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the whole of creation can come to an end, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will continue to exist. Now there is a question that is posed, because Jannah, for example, is forever. Jahannam is forever. So how does that tie into this element of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being al-akhir? And the answer is simple. The baqa of Jannah, the baqa of Jahannam, okay, is incumbent upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It depends on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They don't have the ability to exist forever in eternity by themselves. Within themselves, they don't have that ability. It is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who is al-qayyum, okay, who allows that to exist and to continue to exist. As soon as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides that you can no longer exist, that thing will come out of existence. That is why this name al-akhir only befits Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It only befits His majesty, because the whole of creation is dependent. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can choose to bring it to an end whenever He wants. And it is said that when Judgment Day is established, when the hour is established, that everything will be destroyed. And this is to prove the might of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That everything is taken out of existence, and the only thing that remains is the that of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لِمَنِ الْمُلْكُ الْيَوْمِ لِلَّهِ الْوَاحِدِ الْقَهَّارِ. It's a very, very powerful verse in the Quran. That when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will destroy everything, and everything goes out of existence, and لِمَنِ الْمُلْكُ الْيَوْمِ. Who owns the kingdom now? Right? Everything belongs to لِلَّهِ الْوَاحِدِ الْقَهَّارِ. And that is a reality that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make abundantly clear. So anything that does exist, remember, even though the element of al-awwal does not apply to Jannah and Jahannam because they came into existence. It is the baqa that's the question there, but that is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And just as a side point, the mainstream, obviously, opinion of Muslims is that both Jannah and Jahannam will be there forever, perpetual. Though there's a minority opinion that eventually Jahannam will come to an end. But the main opinion, the standard orthodox opinion, is that both of these things will be in existence forever. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He is al-Zahir wal-Zahir. Now,